My name is Arthur, I'm 58, and for 30 years, I'd lived a lie, that I was a valued, indispensable father. I thought my quiet presence was enough. That illusion shattered one cold December afternoon when my daughter, Chloe, called. "Dad, maybe this year, it'd be better if you sat this holiday gala out." Those words, delivered with a hesitant sigh, were the spark. How quickly could a lifetime of assumed love unravel? In just 3 weeks, a viral video, a citywide award, and countless unexpected revelations tore through my carefully constructed world. It exposed not just my loneliness, but the quiet, everyday man who perpetuated the lie. He was busy planning the perfect holiday gala, completely unaware his carefully crafted facade was about to crumble before the entire city. Before I do, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story earns it. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I like knowing who's out there. The phone rang at 12:17 a.m. I was half asleep in my recliner, my left knee throbbing from the cold, when the screen lit up. Chloe. My daughter. I answered on the second ring. Dad?" Her voice cracked. For a second, I thought something terrible had happened to one of the kids. "Chloe, what's wrong?" There was a long pause. Then I heard her crying. Not the polite kind of crying people do when they're embarrassed. Real crying. "Dad, why is your face on every news station?" I sat there blinking. The television was still on across the room. The volume was low. Some overnight news program was running. I looked from the screen to the phone and back again. "Chloe, what are you talking about? You were on Channel 7, then Channel 2. Liam just found another clip online." I rubbed my eyes. My hand still stung from a cut I'd gotten earlier that night, a minor mishap from tinkering with an old engine part. "Sweetheart, slow down." She took a shaky breath. "Dad, I didn't know." And right there, before she said another word, I knew exactly what she meant. Because 6 hours earlier, my daughter had told me not to come for the holiday gala. The strange thing is, that wasn't even the worst conversation we'd ever had. Not by a long shot. The worst conversations usually happen quietly. No yelling. No slammed doors. No dramatic speeches. Just a few words that stay with you longer than they should. 3 days earlier, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Raleigh, North Carolina, paying bills and pretending retirement was as relaxing as everyone says it is. My house was quiet. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. My wife, Sarah, and I had divorced 15 years earlier. Since then, I'd learned how to live alone. You learn little routines. You make coffee for one. You eat leftovers for 2 nights instead of 1. You talk to the dog. Then the dog dies and you talk to yourself. Life gets smaller. Not bad, just smaller. The bright spots were always my daughter and my grandkids. At least they used to be. I still remember teaching Chloe how to ride a bike in the parking lot behind our church. I remembered sitting through dance recitals that felt longer than some of my cross-country hauls. I remembered helping her move into her first apartment. Then helping her move out. Then helping her move again. That's what fathers do. Or at least that's what I thought. My phone rang that afternoon. Chloe. I smiled when I saw her name. "Hey kiddo." "Hi Dad." Something sounded off immediately. Parents know. It doesn't matter if your children are 5 or 35. You know. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah." Too fast. Then silence. I leaned back in my chair. "What is it?" Another pause. Finally she said it. "Mom and Bryce are hosting the holiday gala this year." Bryce. My ex-wife's husband. They'd been married about 6 years. Bryce wasn't a monster. That's the thing. Life would actually be easier if he were. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't cruel. He was just the kind of man who always needed to be the most important person in the room. A flashy luxury event planner, he moved through life as if every moment was a stage for his grand performance. If somebody told a story about a successful business deal, Bryce had closed a bigger one. If somebody organized a local charity drive, Bryce had chaired a national committee. If somebody volunteered, Bryce volunteered more, and always with a camera crew nearby. After a while, it became exhausting. Still, I kept things civil. For Chloe. Always for Chloe. "Okay," I said, "what time should I come over?" The line went quiet. That's when I knew. My stomach sank before she even answered. "Dad?" I stared out the window at the early winter gloom settling against the mailbox. "Dad, maybe this year." She stopped. Then started again. "We're trying to make Bryce feel more like part of the family." I didn't say anything. Honestly, I wasn't sure I heard her correctly. "So," she cleared her throat. "Maybe it'd be better if you sat this holiday gala out." The words settled into the room slowly like dust. I looked at the small, artificial pine tree standing in the corner. The same tree I'd owned for almost 20 years. A few ornaments Chloe made in elementary school still hung on the lower branches. One was a crooked clay angel. Another was a popsicle stick snowman. I'd kept them all. Apparently longer than she'd kept me. "Are you there?" she asked softly. "Yeah." I swallowed. "Yeah, I'm here." "Dad, please don't take this personally." That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because there was absolutely no other way to take it. But I could hear the discomfort in her voice. She already knew she was hurting me. She just wanted permission to do it. So, I gave it to her. "I understand, sweetheart." Another silence. "Really?" "Sure." The lie came out smoother than I expected. We talked another minute. Nothing important. Then the call ended. I sat there alone. The refrigerator hummed. The furnace kicked on. Outside, the bare trees swayed in a cold breeze. I stayed at the table for nearly 20 minutes. Just sitting. Thinking. Trying to decide whether I was angry. The truth? I wasn't. Not at first. Mostly I felt tired. Tired in a way that's hard to explain unless you're past 50. Not physically. Emotionally. Like you'd spent years carrying something heavy and suddenly realized nobody noticed you were carrying it. The next morning I went shopping anyway. I bought gifts for the grandkids. A remote control truck for Liam. An art set for Maya. For Chloe, I bought something different. Not expensive. Just meaningful. Over the next 2 nights, I sat at my dining room table putting together a photo album. 30 years of memories. Birthday parties. School plays. Fishing trips. Graduations. Family vacations. Pictures she'd probably forgotten existed. I spent hours organizing them. Sometimes smiling. Sometimes staring at a photo longer than I should have. By the eve of the gala, the album was finished. I wrapped it carefully. Then I loaded everything into my old Ford pickup. I told myself I was only dropping off gifts. Nothing more. No speeches. No guilt trip. No surprise visit. Just one last fatherly responsibility. At least that's what I thought. I had no idea that before the night was over, my entire life would be sitting on the evening news. The eve of the holiday gala arrived gray and cold. The kind of North Carolina winter day where the sky looks like a sheet of dirty steel and the wind somehow finds its way through every layer of clothing. I woke up around 6 o'clock. Couldn't sleep anymore. Retirement had done that to me. My body still thought it had a job to do, a rig to drive across state lines. I made coffee. Fed the birds in the backyard. Watched a pair of cardinals fight over the feeder. Then I stared out the kitchen window longer than necessary. I kept looking at my phone. Not because I expected Chloe to call. Because part of me hoped she would. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized how ridiculous the whole thing was. Maybe she'd say, "Dad, forget what I said. Just come." The phone stayed silent. Around 10 o'clock, I loaded the gifts into my truck. The roads weren't terrible yet. A light sleet had started falling, but Raleigh had seen worse. I drove across town to Chloe's neighborhood, a newer subdivision. Big houses, perfectly manicured lawns, the kind of place where every garage looked cleaner than my living room. I pulled into her driveway. For a minute, I just sat there. I could see elegant holiday decorations through the front window. A towering, professionally decorated tree, twinkling lights, movement inside, people laughing. The grandkids were probably already excited. I imagined Liam running around in his dinosaur pajamas, Maya showing everyone whatever craft project she'd made at school. I almost got out. Almost walked to the front door. Almost knocked. Instead, I grabbed the gifts. I carried them to the porch, set them down carefully. Then I added the photo album on top. No note. No message. Nothing dramatic. Just gifts. I stood there a moment longer. Then I turned around and walked back to my truck. The entire delivery took less than 2 minutes. Still hurt like hell. I drove away before anyone saw me. Or maybe before I saw them. Sometimes there's a difference. Back home, I spent the afternoon doing absolutely nothing useful. I watched part of an old NASCAR race from years ago, one I'd already seen. Then I heated up some leftover chili from a local diner. The chili was bland. The cornbread tasted like cardboard. I ate it anyway. Around 4 o'clock, I pulled out a box of old camcorder footage. Years earlier, I'd converted a bunch of family videotapes. Chloe as a kid, birthday parties, school events, vacations. I slid one into the player. The screen flickered. Suddenly, there she was. 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, riding a bike for the first time. "Don't let go," she shouted. "You got it," my younger voice answered. Then I immediately let go. She pedaled 20 feet before realizing she was alone. The look of pride on her face nearly broke me. I watched another hour, then another. By evening, the house felt smaller than usual. The artificial pine tree glowed quietly in the corner. A little thing I'd assembled myself. Nothing impressive, but enough. Around 7:30, I considered doing something stupid. I thought about driving back. Not to start an argument, not to force my way into dinner, just to see the kids. Maybe wave through the window. Maybe leave after 5 minutes. I actually put on my coat, got my keys, walked to the front door, then stopped. Because if someone has to beg for a seat at your table, the seat isn't really theirs anymore. I hung the coat back up. That decision hurt, but it also felt strangely peaceful. A little after 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Not Chloe. A text from the Community Outreach Center. Winter weather was getting worse. Volunteer help might be needed. I volunteered there a few times a month. Nothing heroic. Just helping folks stay warm during rough weather. Making coffee, moving supplies, listening to lonely people talk. Sometimes that's enough. I texted back, on my way. The center sat in an old community building downtown. When I arrived, the place was busy. Several homeless men had come in from the cold. A couple elderly residents from an apartment complex had lost heat temporarily. People were drinking coffee, watching television, trying to stay warm. For the next 2 hours, I did what needed doing. Moved folding tables, carried blankets, fixed a stubborn thermostat, made bad jokes, the usual. By 10:30, things had settled down. The sleet outside was falling harder now. The roads were getting slick. I said goodnight and headed home. The storm had picked up fast. Visibility wasn't great. My windshield wipers worked overtime. I drove carefully. No rush. Nobody waiting for me anyway. About 15 minutes later, I spotted headlights at an odd angle ahead. At first, I thought it was a disabled vehicle. Then I got closer and realized it was a community shuttle bus. The front end had slid off the road and into a ditch. Not a major crash, but serious enough. The vehicle leaned awkwardly, hazard lights flashing, sleet blowing sideways across the highway shoulder. I pulled over immediately. Grabbed the emergency flashers, called 911. Then I got out. The wind hit me like a punch. Inside the bus, I could see movement. Mostly older passengers, a local community group as it turned out. People returning from a holiday event. Several looked frightened. One woman was crying. Another man appeared injured. The driver was trying to calm everyone down. I climbed aboard. "I'm Arthur," I said. "Help is coming." That simple sentence seemed to lower the panic level immediately. Years working utility emergencies and driving long-haul freight had taught me something important. People can handle bad news. What they struggle with is uncertainty. I moved through the bus checking on people, helping where I could. Then something caught my attention. A damaged utility pole nearby. Not fully down, but damaged enough to concern me. A power line had dropped lower than it should have. Not touching the bus yet, but close enough that I didn't like it. Very close. I immediately told everyone to stay exactly where they were. No wandering around outside. No climbing into the ditch. No trying to walk home. The driver listened. Thank God. A few minutes later I helped two elderly women step carefully off the bus once first responders deemed it safe. One of them was shaking badly. I gave her one of the emergency blankets from my truck. The other kept apologizing for being slow. I told her she reminded me of my aunt. That made her laugh. Then my boot hit black ice. I went down hard. My left knee twisted underneath me. Pain shot up my leg. For a moment I couldn't breathe. A firefighter helped me up. "You okay?" "Depends how old you think I am." He laughed. I didn't because my knee felt about 90. By the time EMTs fully secured the scene, my hand was bleeding from a deep scrape and my knee was swelling. Nothing life-threatening. Just enough to remind me that I wasn't 30 anymore. A local TV crew arrived shortly afterward. One reporter wandered around filming. She asked me a couple questions. I answered without thinking much about it. I was cold, tired, ready to go home. The last thing on my mind was television. Eventually, an EMT convinced me to let them check my knee. I sat in the back of an ambulance while sleet continued falling outside. The reporter was still filming. The community passengers were finally safe. And somewhere across town, my daughter was probably at the holiday gala, opening gifts around a warm, elaborately decorated tree. I had no idea one of those gifts was about to change everything. The EMT wanted me to go to the hospital. I wanted my own bed. We compromised. They cleaned the cut on my hand, wrapped it, checked my knee, and gave me a list of reasons I should seek further treatment if things got worse. By the time I got home, it was a little after midnight. The sleet was still coming down. Not as hard as before, but enough to turn the neighborhood into a quiet white postcard. Most houses were dark. The holiday gala was ending. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The house felt exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier. Quiet, still, a little lonely. I kicked off my boots and lowered myself carefully into my recliner. My knee protested immediately. Yeah, yeah. I muttered. Me, too. The television was still on. Some local station was running overnight coverage of the storm. I wasn't paying attention. I closed my eyes for what I thought would be a minute. Then my phone exploded. Buzz. 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 I opened one eye. Several text messages. 3 missed calls. More notifications arriving every few seconds. For a moment, I thought something had happened to a family member. Then Chloe called. I answered immediately. Dad? She sounded different. Not nervous. Not awkward. Shaken. Chloe, what's wrong? A long silence. Then I heard her crying. Dad, why is your face on every news station? I sat upright. What? You're on TV. What are you talking about? You were helping those people. I looked toward the television. The local news station had replayed footage from the accident scene. And there I was. Standing beside the bus. Sleet blowing across the road. Looking older than I felt. And honestly, I felt pretty old. The station replayed the clip again. Then another angle. Then another. Apparently, the story had become one of the major local holiday stories of the evening. Chloe, I said slowly, everyone's okay. That's what matters. But she wasn't talking about the accident. I could tell. Something else had happened. Then she asked, why didn't you tell me where you were? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because 6 hours earlier, she had told me exactly where not to be. I didn't think it mattered. That answer hit harder than I intended. Silence filled the line again. Finally, she whispered, Dad. Then she stopped. Like she couldn't figure out what came next. Eventually, she said goodnight. The call ended awkwardly. No apology. Not yet. No explanation, either. Just confusion. I set my phone down. 2 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Sarah. My ex-wife. I stared at the screen before answering. Hello. Arthur. She sounded uncomfortable. Which was unusual. Sarah rarely sounded uncomfortable. I just saw the news. Okay. Are you hurt? That question caught me off guard. Nothing serious. Good. Then silence. Long silence. Finally, she said, Chloe's upset. I looked toward the TV. The station was replaying the footage again. I imagine she is. Sarah sighed. The kind of sigh people use when they're realizing a situation isn't going away. Maybe give her some time. I wasn't planning to do anything else. Another silence. Then she quietly said goodnight. The call ended. 5 minutes later Bryce called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Curiosity won. Arthur. His voice was unusually cheerful. Quite a night, huh? I leaned back. Apparently. I just wanted to say that was really something. There it was. The Bryce I knew. Always eager to insert himself into whatever conversation was happening. Not malicious. Just incapable of staying on the sidelines. He kept talking. About the storm. About local news. About how crazy everything was. Then finally, Chloe feels terrible. I said nothing. Bryce filled the silence. She didn't mean to hurt you. Still nothing. Because whether she meant to or not wasn't really the point anymore. Eventually, he gave up and ended the call. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Not even close. The next morning I woke up to dozens of messages. Former co-workers from the trucking days. Old neighbors. People from my church. Folks I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had apparently seen the story. I spent the morning answering texts. Nothing dramatic. Mostly variations of, "Glad you're okay." Or, "Saw you on TV." Then around noon, something changed. A former coworker sent me a link. "Have you seen this?" I clicked. The video wasn't about the rescue. Not exactly. It was a short clip from the reporter's interview. Just 20 seconds. 20 seconds that somehow had thousands of views already. The reporter stood beside me near the ambulance. Sleet blowing everywhere. She asked, "Do you have family waiting for you tonight?" I remembered the moment. Barely. At the time I'd been cold, tired, and distracted. My answer had been honest. Nothing more. In the video, I smiled. A tired smile. Then I said, "Not tonight." The reporter looked surprised. "No holiday plans?" I shook my head. "My daughter asked me not to come this year." That was it. That was the entire clip. 20 seconds. No anger. No blame. No bitterness. Just the truth. Yet people couldn't stop sharing it. Comments poured in underneath. Thousands of them. People telling their own stories. Stories about divorce. Stories about estranged children. Stories about spending holidays alone. Many weren't even talking about the rescue. They were talking about that sentence. One sentence. One painful little truth. By afternoon, local radio stations were discussing it. Community Facebook pages were sharing it. Neighbors were commenting. People I'd never met were arguing about it. The whole thing felt surreal. I hated it. And yet, part of me understood why it resonated. Because loneliness after 50 isn't something many people talk about. Not honestly. Especially fathers. We talk about sports, weather, politics, knee replacements. We don't usually talk about being left out. Not directly. Around 4 o'clock my phone buzzed again. A text from Chloe. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message, then set the phone down. Not because I was angry, because I genuinely didn't know what to say. A few minutes later another text arrived. This one was longer. "Dad, I just found the photo album." The final page made my chest tighten. Because I knew exactly which page she meant. The last page. The handwritten note. The one I'd written while sitting alone at my kitchen table. "No matter where I spend the holidays, you'll always be my little girl." For several minutes I simply stared at the screen. Then another notification arrived. This time from a local journalist. She wanted to interview me. Not about the rescue, about my life. About the volunteer work. About the man behind the story. And suddenly I had a feeling this whole thing was only getting started. The first thing I did was ignore the journalist. Not forever. Just for a day. Maybe 2. At 58 years old I'd learned that not every ringing phone deserved an answer. Especially when half the people calling suddenly seemed fascinated by my existence. The rescue itself wasn't bothering me. The attention was. I wasn't comfortable being the center of anything. Never had been. When you've spent most of your life driving long-haul routes and dealing with roadside emergencies, people usually only notice you when something goes wrong. You fix the problem. You go home. Nobody throws a parade because the cargo arrived on time. That's just the job. The journalist called again the next morning. Then sent an email. Then left another voicemail. Finally, I called her back. Mostly because I was tired of listening to my phone buzz. Her name was Rachel Bennett. 30-something. Worked for a local Raleigh newspaper. She sounded professional. Polite. Not sensational. Mr. Walker, thanks for calling. It's Arthur. Arthur, I'd love to talk with you. I already told the TV station what happened. I'm actually not interested in the accident. That got my attention. What are you interested in? The people who keep mentioning you. I frowned. What people? The people I've been interviewing. Apparently, while I was busy trying to disappear, Rachel had been making calls. Lots of calls. Former co-workers. Church members. Neighbors. People from the outreach center. The bus driver. Even a few passengers from the accident. And according to Rachel, they all kept telling stories. Stories I didn't know they remembered. One neighbor talked about the time I'd repaired her leaky roof for free during a winter storm. A former coworker mentioned a scholarship fund I'd quietly helped support at a local trade school for mechanics. The director of the outreach center told Rachel I'd volunteered there for nearly 12 years. 12, I honestly hadn't realized it had been that long. One story after another. Nothing heroic. Just ordinary things. The kind of things people do when they believe helping someone is easier than listening to them suffer. Rachel wanted to write about that. I told her no. She asked why. Because none of it matters. She laughed. Actually, I think that's exactly why it matters. That answer irritated me because it sounded smarter than mine. We ended up talking for almost 40 minutes. Afterward, I felt strangely exhausted. Like I'd spent the afternoon defending myself against compliments. A few days later, her article appeared online. Then in print. I expected a handful of readers. Instead, it spread even faster than the rescue story. Apparently, people like stories about old men who minded their own business. Who knew? Meanwhile, life kept getting weirder. Chloe texted every day. Not constantly. Just little messages. Checking on my knee. Asking about my hand. Trying to start conversations. I answered politely. But something had changed. Not out of revenge. Not because I wanted to punish her. I simply didn't feel the same urgency anymore. For years, I'd been the one reaching out. The one making plans. The one checking in. Now I stopped. And for the first time, she seemed to notice. One afternoon, she called while I was replacing a broken shelf in my garage. Hi, Dad. Hey. You busy? A little. There was a pause. Then, can we get lunch sometime? I tightened the bolt. Maybe. The word surprised both of us. Chloe wasn't used to hearing maybe from me. For years, my answer had always been yes. I could hear her processing that. Not angry. Just confused. Eventually, we ended the conversation. No argument. No breakthrough. Just reality. A few days later, another story appeared. This one wasn't about me. It was about Bryce. Sort of. One local television station interviewed several people connected to the rescue story. Somehow Bryce ended up in the segment. That wasn't entirely shocking. Bryce had a talent for finding cameras. The man could probably locate a news crew in a cornfield. During the interview he described me as a great friend of the family. Then he talked about how close everyone was. How supportive we'd all been. How important family values were. The usual Bryce stuff. The problem wasn't what he said. The problem was what happened next. Chloe happened to be standing nearby. The reporter asked her a simple question. Did your father always volunteer like this? Nothing dangerous. Nothing controversial. But Chloe hesitated. Just for a second. A tiny hesitation. Most viewers probably missed it. Rachel Bennett didn't. The internet certainly didn't. Within hours people started connecting dots. Not aggressively. Not like some online mob. Just naturally. If everyone was so close, why had Arthur spent the holidays alone? The question kept appearing. Nobody had a good answer. Especially not Chloe. Especially not Bryce. And for the first time Bryce seemed uncomfortable. I didn't enjoy that. At least I don't think I did. The truth is more complicated. Part of me felt guilty watching it unfold. Another part remembered sitting alone in my kitchen while everyone else celebrated the holidays. Human beings aren't always noble. Sometimes we're both things at once. A week after New Year's Rachel called again. You're not going to like this. Then why are you calling? She laughed. Because you're being honored. I nearly hung up. No. Yes. No. Arthur. I sighed. What now? The city was organizing a community recognition event. Raleigh's shining stars. Local volunteers. First responders. Teachers. Charity workers. People who had contributed to the community during the holidays. Apparently my name was on the list. I tried declining. Twice. Maybe 3 times. The city refused. Which seemed unfair. By then I learned something important. When enough people decide you're a hero, your opinion becomes surprisingly irrelevant. A formal invitation arrived in the mail the following week. I set it aside. Forgot about it. Then Rachel called again. You should probably attend. Why? Because I just learned something interesting. I rubbed my forehead. What? There was a pause. Then she said, Bryce's Event Planning Association is sponsoring one of the event tables. I sat quietly. Okay. Chloe and her family will probably be there. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not because I was nervous. Because I knew life well enough to recognize what was coming. Sooner or later all unfinished conversations demand payment. And after the holidays there were plenty of unfinished conversations waiting for us. The event was scheduled for the first weekend in February. Less than 3 weeks away. Neither Chloe nor I knew exactly what would happen when we saw each other again. But for the first time since the holiday gala, I found myself unable to sleep. Because something told me the hardest part of the story hadn't happened yet. Lessons from this story. Never take family members for granted or assume their presence is enough. Quiet acts of service and kindness often have a greater impact than grand gestures. Loneliness can be a profound and often unspoken struggle, especially among older individuals. Authentic appreciation and recognition are earned through consistent actions, not by seeking attention.